I take us to be collections of cells, each aggregate a smaller, separate life inside us, and time slows and finally stops.
If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself for the podcast? Hello, I'm Dylan Carlson. I'm the guitar player for the band Earth.
And how would you describe the music that you and Earth makes?
Well, my description, I guess because I'm old, I've always thought we played slow, strange rock and roll, but in this era of microgenres and words having different meanings now, rock and roll has sort of become a pejorative term. Uh, so I don't know. I've just always considered us a sort of psychedelic rock band, but I guess people have focused on my use of the drone technique or oblique motion, as they call it in music theory, and so I guess droney psychedelic rock is what I would say we do. But uh,
Would it be fair to say that a lot of your music has been associated with doom metal and drone metal?
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I we definitely have a metal influence. I mean, the term metal has sort of been gone through a number of changes and reinterpretations over the year. I mean, when I was growing up and when I was younger, sort of anything that was loud was heavy metal, and anything that wasn't was rock and roll. So, and a lot of stuff that used to be considered metal is now, lumped under classic rock, which I've always thought was a kind of strange term. But, you know, I mean, I've always, I've always loved all kinds of music, but I mean, I definitely, I guess, cut my teeth or was seduced by the heavier side of music. Again, the bands that, I consider heavy metal bands that are now considered classic rock, like, AC/DC and Sabbath and Deep Purple and Zeppelin and stuff like that. When I was, and then I got into bands like Slayer and Candlemass and stuff like that as well. But then I've also always been a big Deadhead and Allman Brothers and that kind of stuff. So, and then a lot of my first concerts as when I was in junior high were in San Antonio, so they were sort of what would be considered strange pairings now of like heavy metal bands and southern rock bands like Saxon and Molly Hatchet and Black Sabbath with the Outlaws and like bills you might not see nowadays.
That's awesome. I never figured you for a Candlemass fan.
mm. No, I'm a big Candlemass fan. I mean, part of the reason I chose Earth was from that one song where they do that ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and earth to earth part. I think it's Gallows End, but I'm a bit fuzzy this morning.
No worries. So, we should say that this past May, Earth released their ninth album, Full Upon Her Burning Lips. Tell me about this album.
This album, I guess, I guess, in some ways like the end of a cycle and sort of will be the beginning of a new one. We went back to the studio that we recorded Hex at, and in fact, Adrian used the same wind chime that we used on Hex on one of the songs. And then it was we sort of reduced the band to the core duo, which has been since I restarted the band. It's been, me and Adrian with a cast of many fine musicians, but this time I just sort of wanted to focus on the two of us and what we can do. A few of the songs had been bouncing around for a year or so, but the majority of the stuff we sort of came up with, and we did a lot of sort of writing about the month before we went into the studio. So it was a very spontaneous record in that way. And I mean, we sort of entered the studio with a lot of song ideas and then sort of focused on the ones that we thought were the strongest, and then sort of finished them in the studio, I guess you could say. Like the arrangements and stuff sort of came together during the recording on a lot of them. A couple of the songs were the beginnings were in we did a live soundtrack for that movie, The Belladonna of Sadness, at the Ghent Film Festival, so a couple of them were based on ideas from that, and then we rearranged them to function without the visual cues. And then there was one song the oldest song that became Cats on the Briar, we actually sort of wrote during sound check at Hellfest, when we played Hellfest a few years ago. And then, I mean, it changed a bit over the years and morphed into what it was on the album, but the majority of the album was, done in the sort of ideas that came up while we were playing together in the month before we hit the studio.
Now, you mentioned that this album is part of a cycle. How many albums back does this cycle go?
I would say it starts with Hex. That's sort of I guess you would say, the Earth Mark II era. So yeah, I would say that's sort of the cycle. I mean, it's more of a, it's not like it was a plan. Like, I don't really do 5-year plans or anything like that. It more just seemed to, after recording it and putting it out and stuff, and sort of sitting with the music, it kind of feels like that's what it is. And sort of we'll usher in something else when it comes time to do the next record. I mean, since then, we've added another guitarist who's been named Tristan Jemsek, who's been, he did the US tour with us, and will be doing the European tour with us. So,
Sorry, you don't usually play with a second guitarist, right?
no, I mean, I've played with baritone guitarists, but we did one tour, and then we did one tour with Brett Netson on guitar, and then he did the bass on the Moog Taurus pedals. But yeah, and then with Tristan, we've been taking his guitar and splitting the signal, and one of the signals goes to his amp, which is mic'd, and then the other signal goes to the PA and is we roll everything above 200K off, so it adds a bit of low end heft, but without sort of without a bass, and then so it's a kind of a different beast, I guess, than having a bass guitarist.
Now, is he doubling up your parts, or is he playing like a rhythm harmony kind of thing?
We've been doing a bit of both, especially on the parts where there's other parts of the songs where there's space to improvise. That's kind of how I hooked up with him. We have a mutual friend, Clyde Peterson, who used to manage us and is working on the Earth film, Even Hell Has Its Heroes, and he originally drove me on my solo US tour, and then I did a little show here in Seattle at a friend's art space, and where I did some interpretations of Miles Davis stuff, and so he joined me for that, and I don't know, we just get along really well, and he plays really well, and it was nice to sort of have some interplay with the guitars, and it kind of freed me up a bit, since I've always sort of been the guitar that holds everything down. So it's allowed me to sort of step out a bit.
So I've read that you've described the sound of, or maybe the intent behind this album as wanting to give it a kind of feminine energy or witchiness. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I feel like, I mean, to me, music and dance. I mean, I've sort of, I guess, been thinking a lot about this lately because my wife Holly is a dancer, but I've always felt that like music and dance have always been sort of inextricably linked, and we're sort of, for a lack of better term, like humanity's sort of first technology. To me, they're like technologies of ecstasy and technologies of transformation, and I guess you could say shamanic in nature. And there's quite a long tradition in shamanism of cross-dressing, like male shamans dressing in feminine attire and female shamans dressing in male attire. And I feel like that sort of, well, dance is where it's sort of been separated from music in a lot of ways, unless it's like EDM or quote unquote dance music. And even though originally like rock and stuff had dance involved with it, and people danced to it. I mean, dance was really big in the U.S. with Western swing and stuff like that, quote unquote social dancing. But I don't know, I feel like maybe because dance is sort of viewed as a feminine pastime, it's sort of, I feel, been like denigrated and separated from music and marginalized, I guess you could say. And I feel like a lot of the music now, well, I feel like why does dance only belong to electronic dance music? And also, like, I feel like a lot of the quote unquote heavy music has become overly cerebral and masculine and sort of like divorced from the body, even though to me, like, music, like dance, is a body experience as well as an intellectual one. And so I sort of felt like a desire to try and move in that direction, to, I don't know, embrace that aspect of music and restore it in a field that has been, to me, lacking in it. And then I also feel like a lot of quote unquote heavy music is like overtly masculine and overtly just like, it's like dude music and like yeah.
Do you wish more people danced at Earth shows?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people should do whatever they want at a show, but yeah, I feel like it's possible. And I mean, I've seen people dance. I mean, there was one show we did, I think it was in Holland, where there was a woman there who was a dancer, and she was got quite into it and was dancing. And then, I mean, one of my favorite performances, I did a show in London, a solo show, and my wife Holly did a dance performance to one of the songs that I was playing, and it was something I really enjoyed, and I felt it was something very unique and something I'd like to do more of, hopefully in the future. I mean, for example, like Hawkwind used to have dancers, back in the day, and we're quite well known for that, just as sort of a reference to, you know, that kind of stuff. And maybe it's the deadhead in me, because the dancing was always such a big part of Dead shows.
I'd like to talk about magic and the link between magic and music, because I understand that you have an interest in magic. And I talked to an artist a few weeks back who described music as being a kind of magic, or being able to unlock magic in the way that it affects the material world. It's like an immaterial thing that affects the physical world.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's the case. I mean, to me, like I said, music has the potential to be an ecstatic and transformative technology, much like magic. When I look at my life, everything good in my life has come from music. And I mean, it's when I don't when I don't follow music that I get into problems. But I mean, it's like, I mean, music is a great way to focus. I guess you could. I mean, it's kind of strange. It's kind of a way to focus, but it's also a way to step outside yourself and to transcend the ego, if if that's what you want to do. Obviously, there are ways that ego can interfere, and you can certainly let your ego get in the way. But to me, when I have a show that I consider a really good performance, it's like, or when I feel I'm really, for lack of a better word, on a roll musically, it's like I start to play and then I'm not there and the music just happens, and then it's like sort of like coming to, and like I'm surprised it's over kind of thing, because I feel like music is, I mean, like the universe is all vibrational energy, and as a musician, I feel, I'm merely a conduit for that. And when I get out of my way and my ego is not present, I'm a better conduit for that vibration. And then I think it's much like magic, where it's like it transforms the world. It's like, this activity. I mean, it's transformational personally as well as, in the real world. I mean, when I think about, just on a very basic level, like I start from where I started to where I'm at now, I've managed to this thing, music is not really a very material thing, and it's allowed me to, I've seen the world because of music. I've made a living because of music. I've met amazing people because of music. Met my wife through music. I mean, it's like, it's manifested things that, that are highly beneficial to me. I mean, even most recently, because of the success of the current record and the success of the tour, I've been granted the luxury to, like, I've been doing a lot of personal work, meditation and yoga and stuff like that. It's allowed me the luxury to pursue that, you know. So it's like on every level, it's just in my life, it's been transformative. And then I hear people all the time telling me, like, oh, your music got me through this time or this hard time, or this music was part of my childhood, or this music was at my wedding, or this music, it's this immaterial thing has had this effect on so many people in a beneficial way that I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have that ability to physically go and, talk to people or it's just like, it's manifested this discussion, this podcast, like,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's like, I don't think, that's magic to me.
I want to talk a little bit about your solo work, because between this album and the previous Earth album, you did a tour and released a few albums under your own name. How do you distinguish what you release and what you play as Earth and what you play as Dylan Carlson?
I guess the biggest distinction now, obviously it's Earth when it's me and Adrian at a very basic level, but it's also sort of, I feel like it's sort of the intention of the music and for lack of a better word, the influences I'm working with, or the ideas I'm working with. The whole idea kind of started after of doing solo work, started after we did the Angels of Darkness, Demons of Light records. And, like, there was a lot of talk when that album came out about, the influence of the English folk rock, and that was when my interest in, like, English folklore and English occult folklore sort of metastasized and became like became, the, I guess, whatever the obsession or interest or whatever you want to call it, became quite large in my life. And I was still interested in that and wanted to pursue that, but I feel like with Earth, because I have a desire to let Earth do its thing and not repeat itself as much as possible, album to album. I felt like, well, I don't want to do another album that's, Angels of Darkness, Demons of Light, Part 3. But I'm still interested in this. So it was the opportunity to sort of do solo stuff. I mean, the first thing I did for that, the Latitude session, was, that was like me and other musicians. There was, the singer Teresa Colmanaco and then Jody Cox on baritone. So that was, almost another band in a way. And then when I toured it, it was the singer Teresa and my friend Rohir Smal on drums. So again, that was almost like a separate band. And then, I did the self-released album that was just me, which was again exclusively English folk stuff. And then, I mean, like Conquistador, it had been like after we finished Primitive and Deadly, we toured a lot on that record. Like we did three full US tours, three full European tours, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. So we spent a lot of time on the road after that record came out, like about 3 years. And then also it was our last record for Southern Lord, and we had switched management. So I knew there would probably be a bit of time between that Primitive and Deadly and when the next album came out. And so it seemed like it was an opportunity to do a solo album. It was an opportunity to work with Sargent House, because at that time Kathy was our manager, but we weren't putting records out with them yet. And so I floated the idea of the solo record, and I had I had time to do it. And I also felt like, I mean, even though the material on that could have probably been some Earth stuff, I just sort of felt, again, it was like, because it had sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of a Western theme, even though instead of like Hex, which was sort of, the American West, it was situated further back in time to like the Spanish West, I guess we could call it, or the Spanish and Native West, because it was sort of an imaginary soundtrack along the lines of Hex. I sort of felt like, it was something that Earth had already done in a certain way, even though it was different. But that's sort of why I posited it as a solo record. And then it was also sort of the recording time came around because I had booked some solo shows and there was a gap in them. So it was like, well, why don't we use this gap to do something? And then so I guess that's kind of why that happened. And then an opportunity to work with Emma Rundle and Kurt Ballou. So yeah, there was a number of genesises for that, but they all sort of pointed towards a solo project rather than an Earth record at that time.
Yeah, we should mention that Kurt Ballou from Converge produced Conquistador. I did get a chance to see you 2016 on one of your solo shows. You played St. Vitus with my friend Kevin Hufnagel And I have seen Earth before, and I think because you have such a distinctive playing style that it's hard for me to separate your solo work from Earth's work. But I would say, as a solo artist, as a live performer, the thing that struck me is that Earth can frequently be very overwhelming. There's this kind of crushing feeling, and I think when it's just you by yourself playing guitar, it takes on a much more mellow, almost meditative kind of quality. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I would agree. Like, I feel like solo, there's a bit more. I don't want to say Earth lacks finesse, but I feel like there's maybe a bit more. It's a bit more introspective, maybe, and a bit more. Maybe filigree or something is the word I'm looking for. But yeah, I just feel like it's lighter in certain ways. Not that, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's kind of funny how music is sort of divided into these, like, oh, this is heavy, this is light, like, but yeah, no, I feel like the solo thing is, yeah, just maybe a bit lighter and a bit more introspective and a bit more. Well, I guess there's a bit more of an improvisatory feel as well to it.
Now, is the audience for your solo shows the same as an Earth audience? Because I would assume that whoever loves Earth will love your solo stuff and vice versa.
I would say, on the most part, yeah. I mean, it's going to be mostly Earth fans, but I mean, I've never had anyone come up and say, "Oh, I'm only a fan of your solo stuff." I did have one guy say he actually liked the solo shows better than Earth shows, which was interesting. But that was that's only happened like once. But yeah, I mean, Earth is obviously like what I'm known for. It's been my major pursuit for 30 years. Like, it's gonna have more, it just has more heft to it, for lack of a better term. And I mean, and the solo thing is always going to be sort of a different thing. And yeah, I mean, mostly it's going to be people that will know me through Earth. I mean, maybe there's a few people that have heard the solo thing and then discovered Earth, but I think it mostly runs, they know me through Earth kind of thing.
talked about the way that music can change the world around it, and when we talk about the world of heavy doom and drone metal, one album that really changed that world was the first Earth album, Earth 2. Can you talk to me about what your intentions were with the album and maybe some of the influences that you may have had at the time?
Yeah, I mean, that album, like the big difference between, to me, Earth, for lack of a better term, Earth Mark 1, the Sub Pop years, and Earth Mark 2, the current incarnation, is Earth, when I first started doing it, was more conceptual, I would say. It was very concept heavy, and I mean, we're still conceptual, but now a lot of times now the music comes first and then the concept is revealed, whereas before I would sort of start out with conceptual ideas and then manifest those through the music. And when I did Earth 2, you know, the concept was to be really loud. The stage show was the amps, and the intention was to be slow and repetitious. So those were sort of like the conceptual framework at the time. I'd say the biggest influences I was working with at that time, I would have to say would be, you know, Slayer, Candlemass, and King Crimson, because they were a very conceptual band, and I was heavily influenced by them at the time. I mean, I used to sit down to play because, you know, I was into Robert Fripp, and you know, the long song title idea sort of came out of that. And then when we were doing Earth 2, it was when the CD first came out. And so at the time, 73 minutes was the maximum length of a CD. And so it was like, we're gonna fill up the entire CD. So those were sort of the things we were working with at the time.
That's really interesting.
Funnily enough, because at that time there wasn't the digital recording, the maximum you could get on a tape was 30 minutes if you ran it at a certain speed, which is why we had to why there's sort of the weird splices, I guess you could call it, because it was sort of intended as one piece, but you couldn't fit one 73-minute piece on a single reel, so we had to we ended up using, I believe it was 2 reels or 3 reels. I mean, it's funny, since Stuart did the Angels records, we were talking about all the things we would have done different had we recorded Earth 2, now knowing what we know about recording. But at the time, we basically trucked in the entire live backline, which was ridiculous. Like, I was using a Sun Beta lead head for tone control, and then had a 1200 watt PV PA amp to run all the speakers, which was like, I believe it was 14 12-inch speakers, 4 15s and an 18. So I mean, it was a ridiculous thing. I mean, basically, me and the bass player had like our own PAs with us for basically single channel PAs. But and then we did some really crazy stuff, like, I want 6 tracks of this drone, so instead of recording 6 tracks, we mic'd, let's mic all the speakers and run them all to separate tracks, which probably led to a bunch of stuff being out of phase and whatnot. I mean, so the idea was to make this really huge record, I mean, nowadays, knowing what I know about recording, I would have brought in a bunch of small amps and done them separately. Because, I mean, I think it's funny because, like, to me, that album has sort of a weird claustrophobic feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of how we recorded it, whereas if we had done it with my current knowledge of recording, I think it would have sounded quote unquote bigger, but we didn't do it that way, and so it is what it is. But yeah, so the idea was basically, it was sort of like, we're gonna do one long piece to fill an entire CD, and then, so it's kind of funny because that record was basically, you know, the CD was sort of one of the big parts of that album being the way it is, since, you know, vinyl was on its way out at the time. And then I think it's funny because, you know, now like the vinyl version is the one everyone wants, and it's like touted, but it's like, well, it's funny because it was actually sort of the album wouldn't have sort of been possible if it wasn't for the advent of the CD, and it was really built around the CD release.
That's amazing. So I was completely off base because without knowing too much about the history of the album, I assumed that you were more influenced by stuff that was going on the West Coast, like the Melvins and, you know, that second side of Black Flag.
I mean, the Melvins were definitely a big influence. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I was fortunate enough to see the Melvins very early on. I mean, I saw them when they were fast. I saw them when they changed to being slow. And, I mean, Buzz was definitely an influence. I mean, after Hendrix, he was the first guitarist that really taught me that the electric guitar is not just an amplified guitar. It's like the guitar and the amp are the instrument, and that you know, there's a whole field of energy generated between the two that can be utilized. I mean, that's a lot of people I see sort of view guitars as like amplified acoustics, and the amp is like sort of this necessary evil, but to me it's like the instrument is both together, and that, you know, it's a very different instrument from an acoustic guitar, and that it's you know, the one without the other is not the instrument. So yeah, I mean, the Melvins were definitely a big influence. You know, I mean, I was also fortunate enough to meet Buzz when I was younger, and you know, get to see the Melvins practice and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, they definitely were there in the influence pool.
How familiar were you with bands like Skullflower, who were doing a similar kind of thing around the same time?
I mean, it's funny, like, at the time, like, you would hear about bands like that. I mean, like, basically, like, you know, the local record shop would have a copy of NME or one of the British music mags, so you'd hear about bands like that. But I mean, it was pre it was pre Shazam, pre Apple Music, pre the only way you heard stuff was if you actually went out and could find the record and buy the record. You know, it was so. I heard of them. I saw them in NME, but I had never listened to them. I mean, I'd say the biggest influence on me at that time of a current English band would have been like Spaceman 3.
Okay.
Or, yeah, I mean, I'm always been a big Spaceman 3 fan, and a fan of both of their solo outings, Spiritualized and Sonic's various projects. And I got to meet Sonic Boom in '96 when we did this guitar festival in Vienna called Hyperstrings, which, you know, is still one of my favorite moments, I guess you could say. what I remember of it.
Cool.
uh,
So we spoke a little bit about the legacy of the album and the way that it's influenced people. I can name bands that basically just sound like Earth 2. There's a band that's actually named after one of the songs from Earth 2, Teeth of Lions Rule the Divine. How do you personally look back on that album?
I mean, it's very, I mean, it's very, I mean, it's personally gratifying to know that something you did has had that kind of effect or influence, you know? I mean, I certainly am grateful that it has had that effect and influence because it's allowed people to discover Earth and because of it, it's allowed me to continue to do this. So I'm grateful for that. And, you know, I mean, obviously it's, without it being an ego thing, it's something to be proud of. I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, from looking at it from my perspective at the time, the record was not as well received.
How was it received? Because
I mean, there were some good reviews, certainly. Enemy gave us a good review. You know, there was, I think, Forced Exposure. You know, there were good reviews, certainly. And then, I mean, business-wise, it didn't do that well. I mean, the first pressing was 3,000 copies, and it took 2 years to go through that. So, I mean, it was definitely a cult record or niche record at the time. So it's certainly the effect and the acclaim came much later and over the course of time. But it came, and that's, I guess, what's important. I mean, I'm, you know, like all my records, I'm proud that they happened, and I'm grateful that they happened. And, you know, not a lot of people get to make, or especially back then, not a lot of people got to make records in the first place. I mean, now it's a much more open, egalitarian sort of situation where anyone can make a record if they have a laptop and some mics. But back then, the number of bands that got to actually put stuff out was much more limited. So I was very grateful to be able to do it. And, you know, I mean, and then not a lot of people that make records get a record that receives that kind of attention or is that influential or leaves a mark, I guess, for lack of a better term. So yeah, I mean, I have a hopefully healthy sense of accomplishment around it. And then, I mean, at the same time, it's like I'm also still doing this, and so I hope the other records will certainly be well received and whatnot. But, you know, I mean, I guess that's going to be one of the records that is always brought up and always referenced and always talked about.
the blog, I have a column called The Long 100, where I talk about 100 albums that I feel lucky to have heard and that changed my life in some way. And one of those albums for me is The Bees Made Honey in the Lions. So you mentioned that the albums from Hex to the present album were part of a cycle. How does The Bees Made Honey fit into that cycle?
I mean, I feel like Bees Made Honey is sort of the Earth 2 of this version of Earth. It's certainly, I mean, I guess one of the best-selling. At the time, it was our best-selling. The new album has now taken that position, although that, Bees continues to sell. I feel like Bees was, I guess, one of our most accomplished works in that, I mean, I love all of our records, and there are certain ones that are favorites, obviously, but like trying to be objective, I guess I would say that one, everything really came together, and everyone was really sort of firing on all cylinders, I guess you could say, and I feel like there's a very conceptually as well as musically, everything was sort of working synergistically. And then, I mean, certainly it's the I would say our most like Earth 2, it really, I guess, set some kind of benchmark maybe for the genre or the area of music we're in. It also, I think, was the album that really, it attracted a lot more people to the band, maybe from outside the core Earth fan base. Like a lot of people, I think that was their introduction to the band, or discovered the band with that record. I mean, personally, it was, I feel, some of my best playing. And then on a personal level, I got the opportunity and the honor to work with a guitarist I really, really admire and who's really influenced me, Bill Frisell. And I think it really broadened the palette of what is, termed heavy music, with keyboards and trombone. And I mean, I haven't seen any other bands with a trombone player on stage, outside of, ska or jazz. Yeah, I mean, it was just one of those records that has, for lack of a better term, real magic around it, from the music to Eric Roper's artwork to the presentation of it, with the quote-unquote Bible edition cover and the slipcase, and yeah, I mean, it's just a really strong record.
Yeah, and as far as its success, it really tied into the zeitgeist in a lot of ways. One was there was a new popularity in heavy instrumental music. I remember bands like Pelican had suddenly become very huge. And the other aspect is, this this kind of new Western cinema that was happening at the time with There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men. So on multiple levels, you would hit a frequency that a lot of people were feeling, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely.
The album also has, I think, the biggest lineup of an Earth album. Am I correct? Including Bill Frisell and yourself and Adrian Davies. There's 6 people credited.
Yeah, there's Don was on bass, and then Stephen Moore on keyboards and trombone. And am I missing anybody? No, I think that's everybody.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, it definitely is the most, I guess, the biggest, band ensemble that Earth has had.
Now, was there a particular reason why you moved to having a full band like that and then moved away from it?
No, I mean, it's just sort of what happens. You know, you find good players, and the thing is, good players, are usually have uh, other stuff going on, whether it's their own or like Stephen Moore, for example, does a lot of uh, I mean, it's through him that I got to meet Bill Frisell because he worked with Bill and you know, he's worked a lot with Bill Frisell and like Avon Kang. Oh yeah, I think Avon might have played something on there, or maybe that was Hex. But anyway, and then like he just finished a 2-year thing with the First Aid Kit, and then before that he was with Sufjan Stevens. So, I mean, that's the thing is like, you know, really good players are, especially adventurous good players are, you know, in demand for other things. So, you know, their schedules become full and or they want to pursue something else and they move on. So yeah, I mean, it's just sort of what happens. I mean, Earth's sort of past the point of like 3 kids in a van, you know, or like we're all mostly adults now, or as adult as we can be. So, you know, people have other things going on in their lives and can't. I mean, I'm fortunate that I can prioritize music, but you know, there's a lot of people that have other priorities, kids and other jobs and other opportunities and stuff like that, and you know, they go on to pursue those. So you know, you get to play with some amazing musicians, but you also know it's maybe not going to last forever. So you know, try and do as much as you can with what you've got.
Yeah. So before I let you go, tell me what's next for you. I understand you have a European tour coming up in November, December.
Yep, yeah, that's the main thing on the horizon. I'm doing some recording for Clyde's documentary, and then
Do you want to give the name of the documentary?
it's going to be called Even Hell Has Its Heroes.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll be out next year. Clyde's just sort of been interviewing all kinds of people, you know, people that played in Earth, you know, people from Sub Pop, you know, just sort of a long list of people over the course of the years. And then, you know, doing a lot of filming and stuff. So there's still some stuff to be finished and then some music to be done. So, yeah, again, hopefully next year at some point. And then after the European tour, there's a few things percolating for next year that are still sort of, you know, in the works, need to be confirmed. So I won't really mention them because then if they don't happen, I don't want to look foolish. But yeah, it's not sure exactly what next year holds, but there's stuff happening that obviously will let everyone know when they happen. But yeah, so right now it's the I guess the main focus is the European tour. So then it'll be me and Adrian and the new guitarist Tristan. So Europe will get to see the same lineup as the US tour. So
Very cool. And are you also planning or hoping to do some more work under your own name as a solo artist?
I mean, I'm kind of thinking if next year allows it to devote some time to another solo record.
Very cool. Is there anything else you want to say?
I guess that's about it. I guess thank you to everybody that likes Earth and continues to like Earth and shows up. And
so the new Earth album is Full Upon Her Burning Lips, which is out through Sargent House. And people can find it through all the streaming services, and I'm sure you guys have physical copies as well, right?
yeah, we'll have them on tour, as well as we have our own merch stores. Hello Merch is our US one, and Europe and the UK is Evil Greed.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Dylan.
Thank you.